Hi everyone. I'm very excited to interview Peter Exley. He's 2020 Vice President of AIA and also 2021 President-elect of American Institute of Architects. He's co-founder of Chicago-based firm Architecture is Fun and also adjunct professor at Art Institute of Chicago. I met Peter at AIA Las Vegas Convention 2019 and he's a very friendly and approachable person. So I'm really excited for this interview. First section is about your personal experience and journey. Mr. Exley, could you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be talking about architecture with you. I grew up in the north of England on a farm, and from as long as I can remember, I wanted to be an architect. My father is an architect, and having grown up on a farm, I had a great desire to have a more urban experience. So I went and did my undergraduate at Newcastle University in the northeast of England. It's an urban campus. And I was there for 3 years, and after that I moved to the United States. I got an internship in Chicago. I thought that was going to be for a year, and I've stretched it out a little bit since then. And after being in the United States for a little while, I went back and did my graduate studies in architecture at University of Pennsylvania. And since graduating from Penn in 1990, I moved back to Chicago, and I've been here ever since.
I see. What is one particular fact about Chicago which made you stay in that city?
Now, Chicago is an amazingly beautiful place, at least in the summer. You have a fantastic lakefront. And obviously, from an architect, it's a really amazing privilege to be here and to be an architect and follow in the footsteps of, the great legacy firms in Chicago, from Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Sullivan, Mies van der Rohe, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and then to work alongside amazing colleagues, the studio gangs, all of those great contemporary firms, John Ronan Architects, well, we could spend an hour talking about all of the great architects that have been in Chicago and that are currently here. But so that was the momentum for coming back here, and I love being here. The winters are long, but I travel a lot, so I make sure I'm trying to travel in February.
See. Can you please share us about your work experience at SOM and Venturi Scott Brown and Associates? What inspired you to start your own firm?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I was very lucky to get an internship at SOM in 1985, and I thought that was going to be for a year. At the time, it was the world's largest architecture firm, and there were 600 people. We worked on West Monroe Street, downtown Chicago. So having just come from England, and I had been to the United States before, but I hadn't been to Chicago. It was really amazing to be right in the thick of that with some of the smartest, best educated people I'd ever come across. SOM, as it is now, then was a magnet for really high performing people, and I was lucky to be amongst that. And one of the things that I say about that experience was that I learned a lot of really great habits. That there was a rigor and an excellence to everything. There were standards for everything, and those are definitely some things that inform my practice to this day. There's a plus and a minus to most things. One of the things that was habitual there was that we worked 7 days a week, or we seemed to, and we got there early and we stayed there late, and so the idea of work-life balance was a little alien. When I was in grad school, I had the amazing good fortune to work with Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown and Steve Eisenhower at Venturi Scott Brown Associates. And that same rigor and the same caliber of client existed in that office. But there was definitely this understanding that everybody in the office had a life and they had families. And whilst we worked sometimes long hours, Bob and Denise and Steve were always in the office with you. And when they wanted to go home, they let everybody else go home. And they knew your kids' names. They knew everything about your family. And it was a far more equitable, and I'll just say tolerant place. And that was very formative to me. And, you know, after I graduated at Penn and came to Chicago, I had a couple of jobs. But I tasted this caliber of these places, and I'd also, I guess, adopted this idea or this culture of having a life beyond architecture, beyond the architecture office. And so that was one of the impetuses for starting my own practice ultimately, so that I could be in control of that.
I see. And can you please elaborate on, like, you mentioned about the habits you formed at SOM?
Yeah, I think it's a multitude of things. It's about the way you draw and document projects, being very comprehensive, detailing things to the nth degree. It's about things like getting the best photographers to photograph your work so that you can share and promote that work afterwards. It's about marketing things. I think it's really about an excellence at every level, and it's about communication. It's about design. It's about your involvement and leadership in a community. And yeah, I would leave it at that. Surrounding yourself always with the very best people. Mm-hmm. I think those are good habits, and those are things that we insist on at Architecture is Fun to this day.
Okay, thanks for sharing. In 1996, you were awarded AIA Chicago Young Architect Award. What were the significant factors which contributed in this achievement?
Yeah, there's an amazing sister and brotherhood that exists amongst architects, right? We're very social with each other, and our idea of fun is going to a lecture together. We do a lot of socializing together, and the epicenter of that brotherhood and sisterhood is AIA. So, the minute I was qualified as an architect, I became a member of AIA, and I've always been involved in the AIA community. Early on, that was been part of knowledge communities, going to lectures, helping to organize awards programs, and just been amongst the community. And so, part of your aspiration, I think, as an architect is to get acknowledgement for your work. We do a lot of peer review and a lot of awards programs. So habitually, and I suppose this is another habit that I picked up at places like SOM and Venturi Scott Brown, share your work through awards programs. And so entering the Young Architect Award program was a natural and accessible thing for me in 1996. I was 2 years into my own practice, and I was starting to accumulate a body of work. I was teaching, and I was involved in service. So I was fortunate that I had the qualifications, and I was given that accolade of Young Architect. And one of the things that happened immediately with that was it came with a credibility that was acknowledged by more broadly in the community. That this is something that every architect member of AIA in Chicago pays attention to, who's won that. So I became better known through that, perhaps better accepted through that acknowledgement. And then my clients at the time really appreciated it. That they knew I was young, but winning that award came with a credibility that assured them that my work was accepted within the architecture community in Chicago, and well, that's a pretty good standard. So it's been one of several things that have happened to me on this AIA journey. And I think when I was elevated to the College of Fellows, when we won awards, design awards, in the Design Excellence Program for our projects, these things affirm to our clients and to the design community that this is good work and it's worth investing in.
Okay. And if you can name one book that has the biggest impact in your life, what is that book and how it shaped you?
Well, I didn't really mention it when I was talking about the Venturi Scott Brown office. What was apparent there was that research was critical to every project, and that was just rolled into the design process. And so, a rather obvious answer to your question would be that learning from Las Vegas has been very influential to me. Just the idea of ducks and decorated sheds. These are insider architect jokes and postmodern jokes, I suppose. But there's an attitude and an accessibility to that book, I think, that we think about in all of our work. And I suppose, this idea that Main Street is almost all right, that the idea that, if a building looks like what it's supposed to be, it becomes more accessible. I think that's important in our work. I think it's important that our clients see our work and our design as something that is tailored very specifically to them and that it's accessible and relevant to them, that it's not esoteric or out in left field. So that's one book, I think, that has been quite influential.
And when did you read that book?
I think I was supposed to have read it in architecture school, but I perhaps did not read it as carefully as I should have done. I'm sure I did enough to matriculate with it, but I think once I was in the Venturi office, that I felt the need to, actually just before I started work there, I felt the need to read it more carefully. And it's something that I like going back to from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Any role model, guide, or mentor who made a significant contribution in your life?
I have a friend in Yorkshire in the north of England where I grew up, an architect called Brian Wall. I mentioned my father was an architect, but I think when you have parents or family members, often the joke is that they try to discourage you from being an architect. My dad never did that. He was always very supportive. But I think it was hard for him probably to be a mentor, and it was probably hard for me to sort of acknowledge him as in that role. So a colleague of his in the architecture community where I grew up was always very supportive and interested in looking at my work, particularly when I came home from college in the winter and spring breaks. He was very, very supportive. And he was quite adept as a communicator. And he helped me a lot in the formatting of my portfolio. And he was also quite a successful businessman. So I was aware through him of, again, more good habits. And I saw him, he lives in the south of France, or spends his time between the south of France and Yorkshire, and still practices architecture. And we spent some time together this past Christmas. So he doesn't spend as much time in the mentorship role, but he definitely was an important figure early on in my career.
Mm-hmm.
Mentors are critical.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really important, like, to go to these conferences and meet like people who can guide you in the right direction and play a mentorship
Yeah.
role in your life.
Yeah. I think actually it's the reason to go to conferences at all. Obviously, there's some content, and there are these things that we like to do as architects, like I said, go and hang out together. But meeting new people and having the conversations like you and I had in Las Vegas, they're unexpected, but they're relevant and they have meaning to us. And, I think the one thing that always happens is in these conversations is, there's some follow-up, and these things start to direct you down pathways that have meaning in your practice.
Mm-hmm. Now, next we'll move to your professional work section.
Yeah.
So, what has been the proudest moment in your career?
I think there's lots of them. We could look at the chronology and winning that Young Architect Award, becoming a member of the College of Fellows. I suppose winning the election to be president of AIA in 2021. These are extraordinary things that, as an even younger architect, I would not have thought possible, or would not have thought, oh, that would be me. So I think that those achievements are an immense source of pride. However, I would say that working with my partner, Sharon, with our clients, and making a real difference in the lives of people and their communities through the work we do. That's what's really gratifying, and that's what is particularly motivating. And it's hard to pull out a single client to that. We work on a lot of different projects at a lot of different scales, but I always feel like a project is better for us having been there and having a relationship and enabling this client or community to build something of which they're proud and something that supports their mission. But we hear it quite a lot. A client will say to us, oh, this project is really world class. And it's a little disingenuous to their own community, whether this is in Chicago or whether it's in a smaller ex-urban or rural or suburban community. I'm always surprised that people don't feel like they're already in a world-class place. They're part of the world community. It's a compliment, I suppose, that it's more than they expected, that it's beautiful, and it's perhaps a little different in their community. But hopefully that thing that's a little different is actually a mirror of who they are and how they serve their community. So those are the things that I'm most proud of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any setback or challenges you faced in your career, and how did you resolve it?
Yeah, I think when, the economic challenges and when, sort of work ebbs and flows, those are always very stressful times. I suppose, and this is perhaps not a good business strategy, but we have a tendency to trust in the universe during those times. And I suppose one of the ways that we've countered that is by having a diverse outlook at what we're doing. And part of that, for me personally, I say I spend a third of my time in my practice, a third of my time teaching, and a third of my time in service and leadership. And so during those economic lows in my practice, we've countered the economic low with my teaching. So there's a sort of reliance on a datum there that we can always count on. And when I've taught more, that's perhaps freed somebody up in our firm to do more work. Whereas if I'd have been there all the time, I would have wanted to do all of that, and perhaps that individual would have had to take more of a supporting role or no role at all. So those moments when there's not as much work as you need, those are the stressful and anxiety or moments of anxiety. But we're doing a lot of things always, so I always feel that there's something else in the background.
I see. What is one thing that keeps you excited in your professional work?
It's always the next project. It's thrilling to get a new project. And, rather like the awards, it's the beginning of a new relationship, and there's an excitement, that somebody wants to work with us and is alongside us. So that keeps me excited.
Mm-hmm. Your firm was awarded 2017 Chicago AIA Firm of the Year award. So what do you think were the key parameters or things which made your firm stand out?
You'd have to ask the jury that. What we talked about, though, I think in our presentation for that, and what some of our colleagues talked about, I think was an attitude and a range of what we were doing. That at the point that we're winning the award, and right now we're a firm of 2 people, small but mighty. And I'd like to think that we open the door for the other firms that are, not the giants of Chicago architecture, perhaps 1 or 2 people firms. And hopefully they think, well, if Architecture is Fun can do it, we certainly can do it. Not to be disingenuous to us, but that we can stand there on the same pedestal as AIA Chicago Firm Award winners, with people like Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, with Helmut Jahn, Perkins and Will, this year Brennan, Stool and Lynch. It's a remarkable list of firms, Wheeler Kearns. We're very proud to be able to stand there. And I think we stand there because we have an attitude for excellence. We are involved in our community, and we help our clients live better lives. The purpose of Architecture is Fun is to make everyday life more fun through architecture. And that's not a frivolous statement, but I think it has something to do with happiness, whether you're in school, whether you're in one of our civic or institutional museum projects, if you're in a library that we've designed, that place is a provider of joy in your life. And if you're the person that we worked with, the client, that the experience was a source of pride and joy and of participation. And I guess at the end of the day, we call that fun, right?
Yeah. Your wife is co-founder of Architecture
Yes.
is Fun company.
Yeah.
So how that has helped you professionally as well as personal level?
I think we help each other in our practice. Back to the Architecture is Fun thing, I'd say, sometimes with a glimmer in my eye, I like to do the things, I only like to do the things that are fun. Well, in the practice, Sharon only likes to do the things that she thinks are fun. And we like different things to some degree. Over the 26 years of our firm, we do everything together, and there is a balance in our practice. She did start her training as an architect, but ultimately her training is in education and art. So she's supposed to be in a classroom teaching, if you look at the qualification. And as an architect, I'm supposed to be doing buildings. We find ourselves most of the time not doing many buildings, and Sharon doesn't spend much time in classrooms. What we spend a lot of time is talking about the experiences that people are going to have in the spaces that we create. What's the story that we're going to tell through architecture and design. And that balance of what Sharon does and how Sharon is trained. She is a great writer. She's a great thinker. Hopefully, presumably, I'm a strong architect and a strong designer. And we bring all of those things together. And I think we both help each other and bring up the caliber of what we do.
What are the emerging trends in the field of architecture that will shape our way of living in next 10 years?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's poignant at this time. But I think the thing that we really need to get to grips with, I think, is how we're going to disrupt architecture. And I think that disruption is going to come about through how we tackle environmental stewardship and how architects rise to the occasion of solving the critical challenges posed by climate change. And we're going to do that through evidence-based design. We're going to bring more data to our work. We are going to design very specific outcomes. And some of those outcomes, that will have something to do with happiness, but they'll also have something to do with building performance. They'll have something to do with the health of the people that are using the buildings and the communities in which they live. And rather than just sort of assuming that will happen, we're going to have to embed tactics and data and strategies within our design process that will persuade and demonstrate to our clients that this is actually happening, that their buildings will be more affordable, that their buildings will use no energy, that the people within their buildings will test better in school, they'll get better quickly in healthcare, that they'll be more productive in that office. These are things that we need to come to grips with as architects and start presenting evidence-based solutions in all of our designs. And we must do that. We must disrupt our industry from within that way, or somebody else will do it for us.
Mm-hmm. We
worked on a school project for a high school science department. And the goal was to have students perform at a higher level. When we measured that at the end of the project, there were 29% more girls were signing up for AP science subjects. So more students were interested in science. What was also remarkable, a year after the project opened, test scores went up 37%. So that's a combination in our project, we hope, of good design, immersing the curriculum within that, recruiting the best faculty, and having them participate in the design process and to design not just the space that we're in, but the curriculum within that space, and have that all be seamless in the way it overlaps. If test scores go up that much, that's the difference between getting into college and getting into the college of your first choice. That's the difference between getting into a college of your first choice and getting in on a full scholarship. So these are very measurable outcomes, and for a school, if it seems a reasonable goal to say, we are going to improve your test scores through design. And these are the types of stories that architects can tell about all of their projects. You can tell them about the projects that you're designing in school. But we have a tendency to very often to talk about how we've arranged a plan, or to talk about a party. But we need to talk about outcomes and what we're going to give our client in addition to a place of shelter. And for a school, we're going to improve the test scores of every student. Seems like a good outcome to me.
I see. What do you think would be the impact of COVID-19 on the future of architecture profession?
Well, that's the thing that we're all thinking about right now, isn't it? It's going to be very different. I think we're all, just as citizens, we're thinking about the next time we're going to go to a sporting event or a restaurant. If we're spending time outside right now, we're thinking about how we walk down the street. We're looking into coffee shops that we can't go in right now, or if we can go in, only one of us can go in at a time. So I think in the immediate future, and I'm sure these are statements of the obvious, I think we're all going to be nervous and wondering how closely we're going to sit. I think it will probably be very strange the first time each of us goes back to a restaurant. The relationship we have with everything from the menu to the front door handle, to the server, to the cutlery, to the restroom. These are all experiences, and our awareness is going to be heightened by that. And from an architectural perspective, there are very pragmatic solutions to how we might open doors, that we might not use our hands to open doors again. We might not be using menus, or we'll be using throwaway menus, or we'll be using our own personal devices and remote hotspots to, make decisions like that, maybe even to order that way. And that the social experience might be different. And I think we can apply this to every building type. A friend of mine shared a document with me earlier this week. He's been looking at the design of the future office space. And he speculates that you'll only be going to your office once or twice a week, and that will be a special occasion. We've all demonstrated how we can work from home, and that we can probably do it with some degree of efficiency. I think we're all distracted, and there's a mental health issue, I think, that is accompanying COVID-19 that is distracting probably our optimal performance from working at home. But I think we are going to look at it very seriously, and it will change everything from distancing and all the things I mentioned about the restaurant. I was watching a television show. I was watching the other night a British TV show, and they were talking about when kids go back to school, they're perhaps only going to go back to school for 2 days a week, and they're going to be working on their homework projects for 2 or 3 days at home. And that will enable physical distancing in classrooms. Probably recess is never going to be the same, or lunchtime is never going to be the same at school. At least until we have strong antidotes and cures, and that we can all live our daily lives sort of reassured that even if we do get to, we get this disease, that there is some pretty advanced cure, and that it's likely that we'll recover. It's a complex time, and the way we approach architecture will never be the same. I think just in the same way that that the Americans with Disabilities Act has changed the way we approach buildings. The outcomes and the aftermath of 9/11 has changed how we approach travel and how we've had to adjust our environments. But the same things are going to happen here, and I think architects and other design professionals are going to be very key in making sure that we can continue to make everybody's everyday lives happier and fun and productive. I'm sure we're going to get back to there. We're just a little nervous about what that looks like, and I'm sure there are going to be some sacrifices that we need to make and some big investments. And I think we're going to have to advocate with our elected leaders for this.
I see. That's an insightful answer. Can you talk about your experience in 2009 economic downturn, how you, your peers, and the architecture community were affected, and how you tackled it?
We were fortunate during the last recession that we had a very large project for us that I thought might have bridged the recession. The recession lasted a lot longer than I thought, so it was rather a cantilever into that. One of the things that happens at Architecture is Fun is when we have staff working with us, we tend to be an incubator for young emerging professionals. So often they are undergraduates that will go back to graduate school, and we're part of that sandwich. Or we're working with students or graduates from an architecture program, and it could be that they'll spend 3 or 4 years with us, and then, well, here's the list of things that they do. Get married and move somewhere else, or start their own offices. In some cases, they go and work in other places or get some kind of promotion. So during the last recession, I think we started with 6 people, and over the course of the early part of the recession, people went and got married and went to graduate school. So as we completed the project, we didn't have to lay any staff off. And I won't say we designed it that way, but it ended up being a fortunate outcome. And as I mentioned before, my teaching was also a stopgap. And academia was full of students at that time who had taken time off from their professional careers to get more education. The one thing that I think is critical and is very applicable now, and perhaps I'm drifting into advice to architecture students here. Students that were graduating during the recession, there were many of them that didn't have an obvious pathway into the architecture profession. And so many of them took alternate paths. They're using their design thinking skills and their skills as an architect in other ways, in other professions. I think it's worth reflecting on that and understanding what architects, we're problem solvers, right? And you can apply problem solving to many, many disciplines. In this time of COVID-19, the current crop of graduating students are probably seeing their job offers rescinded and their internship offers evaporate. And some of the alternate routes are not going to be there this time because other industries are severely decimated too. And heaven forbid, there aren't even going to be jobs in restaurants for just to pay basic bills. So I think it's really critical right now that we use our design thinking to think about opportunities that exist so that we can have a plan B as students. And I think part of the responsibility of leaders in architecture and established architectural firms is to step up and support architecture students in a way that to a degree that we've never done before. I think this is really, really important.
I see. All right, now we will move to our final section, advice to architecture students. My first question is, what advice will you give to young professionals who are just entering in the field, especially in this given scenario?
Yeah, I think that my answer to that one would follow up from what I was saying about having a plan B and architects needing to step up. Qualified professionals like myself need to step up to support the emerging professional. I would say that it's really critical right now for every single student to get a mentor. And you might do that by reaching out to your local AIA or a professor and ask them to connect you with somebody who is established in the field. And, it's the likelihood is that that mentor isn't somebody who can offer you a job right now, but they can offer you advice and they can help you open doors. They can be supportive of you, and they can be the person who will be a good sounding board for ideas that you have. And you will be aware that you have a technical and digital aptitude and an understanding of software technologies that is probably more agile and nimble than that older professional. So there are things that you can give and that make that protege and mentor relationship very much a two-way street. And I think you should all be conscious of the particular skills that you have right now that could be very applicable and quite unique, and think about how you can leverage those. The simple answer is get a mentor and do it right now. An AIA membership is free for students, and on graduation, I believe there's 18 months of free membership. It also comes with, however our next conference looks, it comes with free admission to that conference. So there's extraordinary value in that.
What advice will you give to graduating international students who often might come with a prior experience in architectural leadership and collaborations, but struggle connecting with the field?
Yeah, I would say, that the answer to that previous question probably applies here. Perhaps there's a little bit more of a target for an international student. One of the reasons I think we got much of our early work was because of our connectivity and our networks beyond architecture. I used to participate in the City of Chicago's Sister Cities program. And the City of Chicago, I think, has a relationship with, I think, 32 international cities around the world. That number may not be right, but being part of that program was one way that introduced me to a global community of young, curious minds like myself, but also a network of global leaders and people involved in all kinds of fields across business and culture that were relevant to the City of Chicago. So I suppose, as an international, as an immigrant here myself, that is one of the things that I've always been aware of, and leveraging my global perspective through appropriate networks too. And I think that probably goes for everybody. Don't just hang out with, your own friends, and don't just hang out with a bunch of architects the whole time. You bring a great global perspective to a community, and people are interested in that. But you've got to go out there and talk about it and share it. It could be that, you're doing that through all kinds of volunteer organizations.
I see. In your exhaustive experience in the field, and especially as a member of AIA, what qualities have you seen in a person that has served them well in aversing risk and doing well in their career?
I think architects have a lot of stories to tell, but we don't always nurture the storytelling ability. And I would, the people that tell great stories about why something is important. The story I was telling you earlier about our building is going to improve the test scores of every student. That's a great story. Far more interesting than knowing how many chairs and students can fit in a room and what the square footage is and where the front door to that space is, or what the material is. Rather telling the story about a project and why this is going to make a difference. I think those are the types of skills, I think, that will serve you well, practicing those. Being passionate about what you do in a way that is accessible.
According to you, what kind of job profile is likely to be in demand right now and will be after the pandemic? Like any particular role in architectural field?
That's another difficult question. I think firms are going to be looking for people that can help them with research and to communicate ideas quickly. I think most firms are very adept at production of drawings, of building information modeling. They're not expecting young graduates to come in and be up to speed with that, and it's not necessarily what the skills that they need right now. But they do need people that can communicate that information in accessible and compelling ways, and in a way that is universally accessible to people. I've been seeing a lot of firms and organizations who are working on responses to COVID-19 right now, and there is not the time to produce particularly elegant drawings. People need manuals and checklists, and I think if you look at the information that AIA has been putting out at AIA.org to help architects, you're seeing a lot of elegant documentation produced very quickly that is accessible to a healthcare provider, a hospital administrator, a tent manufacturer that is building temporary facilities with a contractor and is doing that with the Army Corps of Engineers. Architects are sort of part of that, and I think that those types of sort of skills and perspectives that you're picking up, and you're in the front line of in school now, picking up those software and technology skills. I think that's what people are probably looking for right now.
Okay.
Agility and breadth of understanding, and an understanding of what research is, how to organize and present that research in a meaningful way.
I see. Yeah, I think like it even connects to your point of like how we communicate well, and even if we communicate that in a compelling story, then it has way more larger impact.
Yeah, and it could be that is an Instagram post. This is the way and the rapidity with which we communicate these days, and we're going to see more and more technologies like that. They will be at the forefront of. It's probably not Instagram per se, but there's an immediacy to that, and information like that is tagged in a relevant way to be useful and accessible to a broad number of people and globally. And I think architects, and particularly young architects, will understand how to start leveraging that to the benefit of a project and the people that we're trying to help with those projects.
Can you share some experience you had or advice you received that has a humbling and everlasting impact in your life?
When I went back to graduate school, I had 2 or 3 years of work experience. And compared to some of my colleagues, perhaps I thought I knew a little more than I did. And one of the things that I did in graduate school on my very first project was to do something very predictable. And it wasn't a particularly good solution. I thought it looked good, but my professor told me to look at it, and they just told me that it wasn't good. But I had not challenged myself, that I had not really looked at the problem. And for somebody that had worked in the places that I had, that was spectacularly humbling. I had not been modest, and I'd been overly confident about my project. And there are times where this happens in practice. You think you've understood the client, but you perhaps haven't listened as well as you should have. Or they gave you some signals in their feedback to you that you probably should have heard a little sooner or not been dismissive of. And professional situation, when you don't listen to those things, and particularly when you don't listen to them twice, you know, the ramifications for your project and perhaps for your livelihood on that project, they start to evaporate really quickly. And it's hard to get back into a position of trust and to maintain that relationship once that's happened. So I think that awareness of criticism and to avoid complacency in the way you approach a project is something that I've taken from experiences like that. And to be a good listener and to be empathetic and understanding of what somebody's asking for are always very critical. That may seem obvious, but sometimes I think architects sometimes have a tendency to think that we know better. And it's possible that sometimes we have experiences that a client hasn't thought about, but we should also listen very carefully to what they believe they need and to respond appropriately to them. I think if you listen to the client and you respond in a way that helps them tell their story, and that you've demonstrated that you've listened and represented that in your solution, I think that you'll find that they're very trusting in allowing you to, for instance, decide what it will look like. And you know, we know as designers there are many solutions to those problems. And so, you know, if we have grand design ideas or an approach that we like to take, as long as we've demonstrated first and foremost that we've listened, the client is going to trust you to determine the way in which you execute it and give you a great deal of freedom.
Mm-hmm. How can our viewers follow you and connect with you?
So on Instagram, @FunArchitect, and I have a LinkedIn account. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or any social media platforms. I'm on most of them. @FunArchitect, Twitter and Instagram.
Sure.
And Peter @architectureisfun.com.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Peter, for your time. It was a great interview.
It's a pleasure to talk to you today. Yep. Thanks for doing this. And enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too.
And we'll see you at the next AIA conference.
For sure.